Hello, my name is Todd Federman. I teach economics at Montclair State University in New Jersey. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at supply and demand, and specifically, we're going to look at the impact of a change in supply or a change in demand on our equilibrium price and quantity. Before watching this video, you should be comfortable with the first 5 topics. You should understand the law of demand, the difference between a change in demand, which is a shift in the demand curve, versus a change in the quantity demanded moving along a demand curve. Similarly, the law of supply and changes in supply and changes in quantity supplied. And the very, very powerful point, the rationing function of prices, where you have an intersection of supply and demand and the powerful force that moves the marketplace towards an equilibrium price and quantity. Once you've got these 5 concepts down, you're ready for the 6th point. In this video, we're going to look how changes in supply and demand impact the equilibrium price and quantity. Let's assume we have a market that's at equilibrium, and let's say we're talking about corn. We have a supply and demand curve for corn. They're intersecting at an equilibrium point. There's an equilibrium price in the marketplace, and there's an equilibrium quantity that's being transacted at that price. Now we've got a table down below where we're going to record the impact of a change in supply or a change in demand on our equilibrium price and quantity. In the first column, we're going to record what happens when there's a change in supply. We're using the Greek letter delta, which is this triangle, to stand in for the word change. S stands for supply. And in this first column, we're going to have an increase in supply. And then beneath that, we're going to record what happens to our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity. We're also going to look at what happens when supply declines, what happens when there's an increase in demand, and what happens when there's a decrease in demand. What happens if farmers get a new tractor? Well, we anticipate that this would cause the supply curve to shift to the right as the farmers are more efficient. We have a new supply curve S1. Now let's record in our table the impact on equilibrium price and quantity. So we have a new equilibrium point, and because there's an increased supply, our new equilibrium quantity is going to be to the right of the old equilibrium quantity. With the increased supply, farmers are competing. They have to sell at a lower price. So you've got a new equilibrium price that's lower. So when you've got an increase in supply, it's going to put downward pressure on prices, and you're going to see an increase in the equilibrium quantity. What would we expect to happen if farmers experience bad weather? Well, it's going to impact our supply of corn. The supply curve is going to shift to the left because there's going to be less corn getting harvested. So our supply curve shifts left. We have a new supply curve S1. And we're going to end up with a new equilibrium point. Our new equilibrium occurs a little bit to the left and higher. There's less supply, so there's less quantity of corn. So our new equilibrium quantity, QE1, is less than our old equilibrium quantity. And because there's less supply around, people are going to be bidding up against each other and raising the price to get their corn. So we end up with a new higher equilibrium price. So down in our table, when there's a decrease in supply, we expect it to put upward pressure on prices, and we expect the quantity at our new equilibrium point to be lower. What would we expect to happen if an article in the newspaper claims that eating corn is good for you? Well, that would probably impact our demand. The demand curve will shift to the right as people who are already eating corn are going to want more corn, and maybe some people who see the article who don't normally eat corn might start eating corn. So we expect the demand curve to shift to the right. We have a new demand curve D1, and we have a new equilibrium point. Our new equilibrium point is going to be to the right and a little bit higher. We've got more demand, so we have a new quantity of corn being traded in the marketplace as people are buying more corn. So we have a new equilibrium quantity of QE1. And because people are competing to buy that corn, it's driving the price up. So our new equilibrium price is higher. So down in our table over here, when we have an increase in demand, we're going to expect an increase in the equilibrium price and an increase in the equilibrium quantity. Finally, what would happen if the demand curve shifts to the left? I'm going to leave it to you to draw these curves out yourself, but when you do, you're going to see that you're going to end up with an equilibrium price that's lower and an equilibrium quantity that's lower. All right, now that we've examined these 4 different shifts in the supply and demand curves, what would happen to equilibrium if supply and demand both changed simultaneously? Let's take a look. In this table, we're going to record what happens to equilibrium price and quantity when we have a change in both supply and demand simultaneously. Well, it turns out there are 4 cases. You could have an increase in supply that's accompanied by both a decrease or an increase in demand. Likewise, you could have a decrease in supply that could be accompanied by a decrease in demand or an increase in demand. So now we're going to take a look at a market at equilibrium, and I'm going to go through the first case. I'm going to increase supply, I'm going to decrease demand, and we're going to find out what happens to the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Well, previously we said that an increase in supply will put downward pressure on prices. Same thing for a decrease in demand, it will put downward pressure on prices. And therefore, in case number 1, we're going to have a decrease in price. But an increase in supply is going to mean there's more quantity of corn around, but a decrease in demand will be a decrease in the quantity. So we're not sure in case number 1 what the impact will be on our equilibrium quantity. We're not certain. So in case 1A, we're going to have a big increase in supply and a small decline in demand. Our supply curve, we're going to say, shifts way to the right, but our demand only backs up a little bit, and there's a slight shift to the left. We end up with a new equilibrium point where the quantity is going to be bigger than our old equilibrium point because supply has overwhelmed, the increase in supply has overwhelmed the drop in demand. Both of these moved to create a lower equilibrium price, as we expected. So when we've got a big increase in supply and a small decline in demand, we get a lower equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. Now in case 1B, we're going to change the magnitudes. We're going to say supply has a small increase, but demand has a big decline. So we're going to increase the supply slightly, move it to the right. Maybe just one farmer got a new tractor, but we're going to have a big decline in demand. We end up with a new equilibrium point where the quantity is to the left of our prior equilibrium point. So QE1 is to the left of QE. And again, both of these moved to cause prices to go lower. We end up with a new equilibrium price below where we were. So when we have a large increase, when we have a small increase in supply accompanied by a big decline in demand, we end up with both lower prices and a lower quantity. I'm going to leave it to you to do the rest of the cases. I'll just summarize by saying when we're in case 2 where there's an increase in both, we're not going to be sure what happens to price, but we know that there's going to be an increase in quantity. When there's a decrease in both, we can't be sure what's going to happen to price, but we know that quantity is going to decrease. And finally, when there's a decrease in supply and an increase in demand, we know that price is going to go up, but we're not sure what's going to happen to quantity. If you want to prove these out for yourself, take a piece of paper, draw some supply and demand curves, have a big shift in one and a small shift in the other, and take a look at the impact. I hope you enjoyed the video. My name is Todd Federman. I teach economics at Montclair State University. See you in the next video.